Leinster grind out a victory at Welford Road. My name's Mark. Let's talk rugby. Certainly not a vintage performance from Leinster in this one, but there are signs of improvements, and it's definitely a step forward for them. Like commentary team, we're talking about, Leinster, on paper, you expect them to, have won that game handily, but it kind of ignores the fact, the form that Leinster have been in so far this season. So, the fact that they were able to dig that out, I think, again, it's, again, signs of improvement for them, definitely. Still a long way to go, though, but let's get into the game. So, Leinster, they start off, hold on to the ball for the opening couple of minutes, working into the 22. There's a cross kick from Harry Byrne to Conan. He's slipping as he collects the ball, and Freddie Stewart catches him in the head. There's a TMO review, but pretty clear, I think, to me, there's no foul play in that. It's just a rugby incident. And, I heard some Leinster players saying to referees, shoulder to head, like, it's, I think every team, when their player gets hit in the head, these days now, they're saying it's a referee. But again, I think it was just, just a rugby incident. Unfortunately, Conan goes for an HIA and he fails that. He's replaced by Max Deegan. And Leinster also lost Jimmy O'Brien early in the game too. He was replaced by Kieran Frawley, who I thought looked decent in the game. We start then with a Leicester scrum. Leinster then think that they've actually scored off a line out. To go over the top to Henshaw, he kind of just pats the ball back into that gap between the end of the line out and the start of the the backs to Tommy O'Brien. He's come on a really nice line. Obviously, it's a set move. Weaves his way towards the line, then breaks the tackle to ground under the post. But after TMO check, it's clear that Henshaw was offside at the line out, and it's no try, and you can't really argue with that call. Leicester then have a decent attacking opportunity from a scrum with the 22, but Leinster are numbered up and they just forced Hassel Collins into touch. We then have a round of handbags after a tackle in the air from Radwan on low. Penalty to Leinster after things calmed down a little bit. I think it would have been kind of honestly on the border of the penalty getting reversed because Lowe kind of kicking things off. But I think it was just the fact that he was the guy that was taken out in the air. So I think if another player had to come in and really kick things off, penalty probably would have been reversed. Then another penalty to Leinster as Leicester don't roll away, and Leinster opened the scoring from the tee, 3 points to 0, and kind of speaks to the fact that, Leinster, they've got a lot of the ball, not very much penetration though, and, the fact that they're taking their points rather than kicking to the corner, again, a sign, I think, of Leicester's defence there. Then we have a lovely little kick over the top into space to close to the line, leads to a Leinster knock on and a 5 metre scrum to Leicester. And it was just very good kind of use of that space between the defensive line and then the cover in behind, and the bounce then just led to a bit of chaos. They then get a penalty from the scrum, and they kicked that over for 3 points all, and the game was all square again. Leinster then on the attack from the restart. They're on the edge of the 22, but the ball goes loose. Radwan gets to it first. He kicks it on, has the pace to stay ahead of the chasers, kicks it on another couple of times. Great control from him, to make sure, at full pace that he's not accidentally kicking in a touch or wherever, and then he dives on it to score, convert for 10 points to 3. Great breakaway try there for Leicester. There then, you can see as well, Leicester, the next period of play, they're aggressive in defence, and Leinster really are finding it hard to settle into a rhythm in the game. They do, though, force a penalty, and again, they decide to take the points. And, it's a bit of a weird decision, because I think Leinster, last season or a couple of seasons ago, they kicked to the corner in that situation, but Byrne slots it for 10 points to 6. Then they break the line on the left, but Lowe's pass to Kelleher is poor, and the ball goes into touch. And you feel like if that ball had gone to hand, it's probably going to be a try in the corner. And yeah, again, it's those signs of the Leinster just not quite on it, and we've seen it game after game with passes like this not going to hand, not being properly sympathetic, and they are fine margins, and you feel like they will kind of fine tune it at some stage and start to click, but we still haven't really seen it this season. And that's the kind of frustration for me as a Leinster fan, is that you look at those and you feel like some of them are kind of basics, but not being a coach or whatever, there's obviously more to it, I guess, than I would realise. But again, you feel like, Leinster kind of on form. Lowe gives that pass, and Kelleher either gets in himself or he sucks in defence and he's able to pop the ball back inside for somebody else to score, maybe Lowe following up. Leicester then, to strike again before the break. They maul it from a line out before they move it to the backs. There's a cross kick to Hassel Collins. He kicks it on. It comes off Low, and then Hassel Collins is able to get to the ball first to score. Conversion's missed. 15 points to 6 is the halftime score. And, Leinster did most of the possession, most of the territory, but they couldn't take their chances, whereas Leicester took every single chance that they got. And I think at that stage, they probably felt, well, we've got a real chance in this game because Leinster aren't at it. Into the second half then, Kelleher were no clear release. And, on the replay, looks like he's unlucky because there definitely was a clear release and probably should have been a penalty to Leinster for holding on. But, these kind of things, they go for you, they go against you. Leinster will get one, I'm sure, at some stage in the competition or in the URC or wherever. That's the other way around. So not too bothered with that. But Leinster still have a kick at the post. But, the ball, it drifts wide and off target. And, that felt important, really. I think if Leicester had got that and made it 18 points to 6, just had a little bit more breathing room, and just put a little bit more pressure on Leinster, thinking that, actually this gap that we had at halftime, 9-point gap, is now 12. And now we've really got to, up things ourselves and maybe start to overplay a little bit. Leicester then win a scrum penalty. They decide this time we're not kicking for the post. They kick up the line to about 50 metres out. The line out goes awry and Leinster are able to turn it over. And Leinster then win a scrum against the head. And the ball pops out of the side. James Gibson Park picks it up, rides a couple of tackles, fends, and then he's over to score, convert for 15 points to 13. And suddenly, it really is game on from there. Leinster then, they kick the corner after a tackle off the ball on Van der Fleer. They won another penalty for Thompson lifting a leg in the maul. Back to the corner they go. Another penalty. Leicester get a warning. Leinster tapped the penalty, but Joe McCarthy held up on the line, over the line. And it's just great defence from Leicester. They managed to, I think it was a Smith, managed just to get his body in under him, just as he was going over the line to prevent him from grounding, and just, really brilliant there. And they were saying in commentary, we're seeing a lot of teams do it. Obviously, it's something they're doing in training, to be able to get that body position when forwards are driving over. And it feels like now, if you are driving the ball over, you've got to get your own body position absolutely perfect to make sure you get that ball down to score. And Leinster weren't able to do it that time, but it was because of the great work from Leicester. Leinster then, they win a scrum penalty. Harry Byrne kicks for the post and puts them in front 16 points to 15. It's a narrow lead, and feeling like, we're going into the last 20 minutes, they need to find at least another score, because if they don't, the pressure is going to come on them, and maybe, Leicester are actually going to win the game. Then have a tackle off the ball by Slimani, and Leicester up the line to the edge of the 22. Leinster very aggressive in defence. They repel them initially, but then Leicester, some good work from them. They work it back into 22, but then all that undone as they give a penalty away for a neck roll. Leinster then, they're now applying pressure in and around that Leicester 22 and looking to close out the game. And you feel like Leicester really are, like, they're hanging in there, but they're hanging on really, and when a team gets in that position, you feel like just the sheer weight of number of tackles and the fact that you're always close to your own line, that a score is probably coming for Leinster. But you have to remember that, Leinster were applying similar pressure in the first half, and Leicester got a breakaway try. So that was always on the cards as well. Leinster then to the corner after an offside from a knock-on. And, their kicking, I felt, was really much improved in that second half, getting them into decent positions. They were kind of mixing up between, kicking deep, and putting pressure, making Leicester kick the ball off the field, or putting up contestables and, just keeping that pressure on and switching it up as well. I thought was decent. Then Leinster, they go to their maul, and this time they're able to drive over. Sheehan, I thought, did really well as well, because the maul itself stopped maybe about 2 meters from the line, and Sheehan then just kind of broke off at the front and forced his way over to score. And I say it a lot like that, Sheehan makes what I feel is, a below average Leinster maul look really good because of his own ability to score. And I think this is another, instance of that as well. Converted for 23 points to 15. And that was our full-time score. So we're going to look at the stats and then we'll talk about each of the teams. So let me pull the stats up here. So first off, 2 tries each. Leicester's 2 tries obviously coming in that first half, and they didn't score a point in the second half. And we've kind of seen that a lot now in these pool stages with these kind of games where a team will do well in the first half. Like, I'm thinking of let's say the Bulls against Bordeaux. They were like 32-22 up at half time, and then didn't score a point in the second half and ended up losing 46-33. And it's happened to a few other teams as well, where that inability to kind of kick on in the second half and keep that, you really do have to keep the scoreboard ticking over. But on top of that, then if we look at the attack, so meters made 108 for Leicester and 477 for Leinster, and Leicester made theirs from 60 carries. So they're making just over 1.5 meters per carry. And then Leinster from 124 carries, so they're making just under 4 meters per carry. And you can see kind of the fact that even though Leinster were were losing at half time, they were still getting that go forward in their, from their pack that we weren't really seeing earlier on in the season as well. I think Joe McCarthy being back, I think he got player of the match today, was a big part of that. He's, I think they showed at one point in the game that he'd made 20 meters on his carries, but half of those meters were after contact, and it just shows, the impact he can give. And also, I think his impact in the scrum was very important too. His brother Paddy, very good in the loose as well, kind of mixed in the scrum himself. But, I think Leinster and indeed Ireland are a different team when McCarthy is in there. He just brings something different to that second row. Just that bit of dog that Leinster certainly are missing. I think from the point of view of Ireland, I think the players from other provinces bring the dog that Leinster are generally missing. But Joe McCarthy, a big impact in this one. Clean breaks then. 2 for Leicester and 8 for Leinster. And, Leinster making the clean breaks, but again, not finishing them off and thinking about that low pass to Kelleher, which really should have been a try. But they had a few other instances like that where they'd make breaks and then passes were either going to deck, being knocked on or going into touch. And again, really has to be tightened up and cleaned up, by them. And it feels like, these guys really do kind of need to be drilling these kind of things a little bit more. I'm sure they do plenty of drills in training and stuff, but when it's a little bit off like that, you feel like it is kind of, you just have to take the time to, do that little bit extra on them and just make sure that you get them right when you're executing on the field. Defenders beaten then 9 for Leicester, 26 for Leinster. So Leinster certainly, I wouldn't say like in terms of where we've seen them before that they've had a cutting edge, but a better cutting edge than we've seen maybe in recent times. But again, still not quite there. They're breaking the line now, whereas like earlier in the season they weren't even doing that. But now they're breaking the line and not finishing. So definitely more work on there. Offloads then 3 for Leicester, 11 for Leinster. Some of the Leinster offloads weren't the best. Kind of offloading, those kind of ones where you offload behind your own player and then he has to turn around, he gets swallowed up in a tackle. So again, need to improve on that. Passes 78 to 159, and then possession 38% to 62, territory 31 to 69. So Leinster with the lion's share of ball and territory as well in the game. But you have to again give credit to that Leicester defence, that they were able to restrict the number of genuine chances that they're able to create off the back of that. Tackles made then 141 for Leicester and 76 for Leinster. I think it was at one stage, I think it was maybe 120 odd to 40 something. So Leinster had to make a few tackles in the last kind of 15 minutes, I guess. Tackle success then 78% for Leicester. It's round about where you expect teams to be, in the Champions Cup. Basically low 80s to, high 70s is okay. It's not brilliant. And Leinster 85% is a lot higher than we normally expect them to be. But we know Gary Ringrose in this one, and he's normally the shooter out of the line, and we weren't really seeing shooters out of the line for them. But also, part of that was the fact that Leicester, they obviously had a very clear tactic that they didn't have that much ball, but when they had the ball, they weren't going through that many phases, a couple of phases, and then they'd go to a kick. So there wasn't really opportunities for shooters. Anyway, turnovers 1 then, 8 for Leicester, 5 for Leinster. On to set piece, lineouts. 19 from 20 lineouts for Leicester for 95%, and 16 from 16 from Leinster, 100%. So their lineout certainly was improved. No lineout steals. Scrums then, 6 scrums won for Leicester for 75%. So I guess that's 6 out of 8. 5 for Leinster for 83%. So that has to be 5 out of 6 that they got there. And, the scrum was a bit of a lottery at times, both teams giving away penalties, and both teams looked like, at one point in the game where each team was struggling, on the opposite side of the scrum. So the scrum was kind of wheeling a little bit and going down, as kind of one side dominant was pushing forward, and then on the opposite side, so it didn't look like either team was intentionally wheeling the scrum. It just looked like there was kind of mismatches on both sides, but it wasn't really clear enough for either team to be said to be dominant or to be infringing a lot. So the penalties kind of went either way. On to kicking then. Kicks from hand, 33 for Leicester and 34 for Leinster. Kick meters then, 889 to 731. I think that's, kind of reflects the fact that Leinster were dominating the territory. So Leicester, for the most part, were kicking long because they were trying to exit. So, and Leinster, as I said, especially in the second half, were kind of mixing things up a bit more with contestables, especially, kind of from just inside their own half, around about halfway to the edge of the 22. Retained kicks then, 9 for Leicester, 6 for Leinster. So, Leicester doing well in that regard, but again, they didn't really create too much off the back of it. Penalty goals then, 1 to 3. On to breakdown then, 44 rucks won by Leicester, 2 lost. 95 for Leinster, 1 lost. 92% ruck success for Leicester. Not great, honestly, especially when you think that, Leinster weren't competing all that much, but they did still turn over a couple of balls in the ruck. And then Leinster, 95 with 1 loss for 97%, is kind of where you expect teams to be on their own ball with the ruck. Then turnovers won, ruck and mauls 8 to 5, maul totals 6 to 4, 100% each. I'm blue in the face talking about maul meters being wrong in this competition. Somebody sort out your stats, please. Okay, so let's talk about the team. So Leicester now, they've played 2 games and they have 0 points in the competition. I feel like the performance today deserved at least a losing bonus point. They didn't create a whole hell of a lot going forward themselves, but they took the chances when they were there. And you've got to give them credit for that. And then they defended really well at times too, and limited, what Leinster could do. And I thought they scrambled well too when Leinster did break the line. So, yeah, and it felt like it would have been fairer if maybe they had got, let's say, a late try or a penalty or something just to bring them within those 7 points and give them that losing bonus point. I think it was something that they deserved, but unfortunately for them, they didn't get. So now, they're in a situation where they've, you think that, well, they've got to, their other home game now in this pool, they've got to win that with a bonus point. So they have to get 5 points out of that game. And then the other game, their away game, they've got to get at least 2 points out of that game. So either a draw, which is very rare in rugby, or they've got to get losing bonus point and try bonus point if they don't win the game. So I think realistically, in terms of progression, they probably need to win their last 2 games, because we've seen pools last year where, was it Racing 92? I think in Harlequins, both finished on 9 points, and Racing dropped down to the Challenge Cup. Now, we saw teams like Ulster progress on 5 points as well, so that's possible. But in that scenario, you're relying on other teams to do you a favour, and you don't really, you want it in your own hands. And for Leicester to be able to do that, it means winning their last 2 games, I feel. Leinster then, they've got 2 wins out of 2. Obviously, there's no kind of 100% in terms of the 5 match points, but looking at the game, it's not like it was really on the cards for them. The way the game went, that you didn't feel like they had enough. Maybe if that Kelleher, potential Kelleher try had gone in, maybe then with them on, 3 tries coming towards the end. But I always say it, you can't really say, oh, what if that happened, and then assume that everything else in the game is going to happen the same way. Because if Kelleher does go in for that try, well then, the rest of the game can't play out the same way, because suddenly you've got a restart from Leicester that you didn't have. You had, I think was a scrum or line out to Leicester. So the way the game is restarting has changed. So therefore, everything that follows is going to change as well. So yeah, what ifs are a bit messy that way. But yeah, I don't think in terms of what we saw tonight that a try bonus point win, a 5-point win was really on the cards for them. So I think they got as much as they could out of the game, and potentially that could have been a loss for them, and things would have been very different. But feels like they definitely need to improve. One thing we talk about with Leinster though is generally they just glide through the pool stages, and then when they come up against tougher opposition, whether that's in quarterfinals, semi-finals, or a final, and they're not able to cope with it, then we say, oh, it's because they weren't tested, they weren't battle hardened. They were definitely tested in this game, and they've done something that they haven't done in a long time in a Champions Cup game, which is they come up with a score in the final quarter of the game to actually win the game. It's been a long time since you've seen a Leinster team having to do that and being able to actually do it, because you look at their final defeats and those are the positions they were in, having to go up with a score to win it, and they failed. They failed 3 years on the bounce to do that. So at least that is definitely a positive for them. But it feels like you've got to couple that with them also finding some proper form and sorting out what's going on in terms of their attack as well. But, I think as a Leinster fan, for me, I feel certainly more positive about this and about the start they've made so far to the Champions Cup.